Take off my mask since I'm a safe distance from all of you. Can you hear me? No? Let me do that again. I think that's better, right? A very good afternoon again, and welcome to SMU. I am a safe distance from all of you, so I will remove my mask so that you can hear me better. It's a delight to be hosting the first SMU Presidential Distinguished Lecturer Series, or PDLS, this year. It's, in fact, the first PDLS since 2019, whereas we typically do at least once, sometimes more than once in a year. And of course, our plans for such events last year were put on hold due to pandemic restrictions. I'm therefore delighted to restart the series with this lecture that is held in a hybrid format, and to welcome a small audience on campus, thank you for coming, but also a larger number that's joining us from beyond this room. And I'm particularly delighted that the format actually does allow us to reach out to others beyond Singapore and from around the world. So thank you all very much for coming or for joining. As we resume PDLS events, we are also taking the opportunity to enhance the format and to include a panel discussion, which I'm very pleased to moderate. The panel members will explore some of the issues raised by our speaker, and together they will debate them further before we open the discussion to the floor for a Q&A with those of you here as well as online. We hope that this extra dimension will stimulate a rich exchange of ideas as our speaker engages with panel members from our faculty and from the corporate and government sectors. Our speaker today is Mr. Amit Midha from Dell Technologies. Before I introduce him, I would just like to outline the close relationship that SMU has built with Dell over a number of years. For a start, a number of undergraduate and postgraduate SMU students have gained valuable experience through internships at Dell Singapore since 2015. They have been involved in supply chain, product development, strategy, and data analytics roles. For undergraduates in the audience, I hope you didn't miss the opportunity to apply for the internship positions at Dell in UX design and software engineering roles, which were advertised by our Career Center for the upcoming summer. Dell also recruits our students upon graduation and has involved SMU in events such as the Dell Augmented Hackathon and Global Operations Virtual Week last year. Just last month, Dell Technologies and SMU announced a collaboration to incorporate cloud-native technologies and content into the SCIS, or the School of Computing and Information Systems, undergraduate curriculum, and to provide classroom-based training and hands-on lab experience to over 1,000 students in the coming years. As of March 2021, more than 700 SCIS students have already garnered hands-on experience in cloud-native practices and technologies under pilots for this program. Led by VMware, Dell Technologies will also be mentoring final year students on cloud-native projects and participate in guest lectures and technical workshops to deepen the students' cloud-native skills. So a lot has gone on and will continue to go on between Dell and SMU, for which we're very grateful. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Mr. Amit Midha, who is the president of the Asia Pacific and Japan, or APJ, region, and the Global Digital Cities Business for Dell Technologies. Recognized as the most promising business leader in Asia in 2016 by the Economic Times, he spearheads Dell Technologies' efforts in the region to enable customers across APJ in their digital transformation journey. Amit also leads Dell Technologies' Digital Cities business globally, driving digital city initiatives in public sectors worldwide. Amit has held various leadership positions in sales, marketing, and corporate strategy organizations in the Americas, APJ, and the Greater China region. He has also served as the chair for the Global Emerging Markets Business and Global Public Business Council within Dell. Amit is a member of the Global Future Council on Cities and Urbanization, which serves as a brain trust for the World Economic Forum and aims to challenge assumptions and introduce fresh ideas to reshape global systems for the benefit of humanity. He is also a member of the board of directors of the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum, which aims to foster deeper strategic and economic cooperation between both countries. There is a lot more I could say. It's a very distinguished career, and we're deeply honored to have him with us. I would now like to invite him on stage to address us for the next half an hour or so, and after that we will convene the panel discussion. So please join me in giving Amit a very warm welcome to SMU.
It's a pleasure to be with you today. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. So I am delighted to be with you today. I'm honored to be with you today. And what an amazing topic. We will talk about the change. We'll talk about cities as the platform of change. I'll introduce digital city as a concept. And we will talk about how to make it happen. And I will close my talk talking about what is it that students need to think about in terms of navigating this future that is imminent, that we are in the middle of. So let's get started. Let me start by the first topic, the change. I would like to make sure that we can see a change happens at various levels, sometimes slower, sometimes faster. This is the change over 2,000 years in the GDP mix of the top countries. Okay? And in this case, you can see how GDP and how the countries have won and lost out over the last 2,000 years. And what you will see that the start of the couple of millennia back, between China and India, you have about 80% of GDP. And today, you see it's a lot more fragmented, and China has come back strongly. What you will also see, that big changes in the GDP mix of the countries actually come at the time of change. Whichever country can manage change better than the others, they have been able to increase their GDP mix significantly. So you can see how UK starts to go through the Industrial Revolution, how the UK mix started to go up. Whether it was steam engines, the steel, whether it's about creating a factory model, all of that started to change. And as you can see how US led the digitization wave and industrial wave beyond World War II, how that has changed dramatically after that as well. And how now China, having adopted of modern production practices, automation, cheap capital, and a centralized planning, how China has been able to do that. But again, what I wanted to talk about is change is constant. And change will always continue. And change happens at every level. Now, if you don't believe, let me give you the next example of change. This is the top 10 companies in US over 100 years. Okay? So you can see 100 years ago, what were the most valuable company in stock exchange? What was the most valuable company 50 years ago on stock exchange, and what is most valuable now? One of the pieces you will see is that almost 6 out of 10 companies today are technology companies. So wherever the change and digitization and data is happening, whoever can harness that is actually considered more valuable, more ready for the future. And what used to be 100 years back was a lot more oil and a lot more steel, and similarly, you started to see retail 50 years ago. So sometimes you get to see and understand change better when you see over longer time horizon. For companies, you can see over 100 years or 50 years. For countries, you have to see over thousands of years. For individuals, given our lifespan, you have to see in decades, if not shorter. But what you will also see, the mortality of the companies. From 100 years ago, how many companies made it to 50 years? From 50 years ago, how many companies made it to this year? There is a huge mortality. The S&P 500 companies are actually dying at the rate, or dying or getting sold or merged with another company at the rate of every 8 years. That's a massive level of change that is happening even at the 500 biggest companies. Another change, how the jobs are changing. Now, think about this. In 200 years ago, 1810, this is the US data, most of the jobs were in the agriculture, right? And manufacturing picked up, went around, and then came down. And the rest of the economy has picked up. This is where GDP growth has come about, where you are building the new kind of jobs that are more future ready, not necessarily relying on the old models and the old economic drivers. Again, you can see change is here to stay. Change will continue. It will happen at the country level, company level, and the society level. Yeah? Now, this is the first premise of my conversation, but let me cap that by introducing this concept called K type of recovery. Now, you may say, what is the K? I know about V type of recovery, U type of recovery, W. K is basically recovery will be uneven. Some companies and some countries and some societies will go up like an upper bar of the K and will continue to prosper if they can manage the new drivers of the economy, new drivers of job creation. And some countries and some companies and countries will struggle with like a downward sloping K swoosh because they will not be able to harness those drivers. That's the fundamental premise. Now, it doesn't mean you have to go down in value. What it means that even if you don't go anywhere, if you're flat, but rest of the economy going up, your mix of the total GDP, if you recall, from the country chart, is going down, right? That means as a society, you're not winning. And that's the part I think you have to think about. Change is here. The leadership is about first, accepting the change, 2, understanding the change, and 3, harnessing the change to create exponential benefits versus the destructive or disruptive value that it may create for you. If you don't believe the change and how fast change can happen, and I know this chart may not be easy to see for some of the folks in the back, this is a chart from New York City on the this is the parade that was done at the Easter time, so pretty much this time. On the left, the chart is of the same street, taking the picture at 1910. On the same chart, same picture, somewhat the latitude is a bit different, in 1920. On the left side, you will see all our horse carriages, but one car. That's circled. And on the right side, you will see all cars, but one horse carriage. If 100 years ago, the city that was sitting at the top of the society could flip over within 10 years, we have to imagine the changes will happen even faster in today's time, 100 years later. Which means for the academia, for administrators, for the leaders, if the changes will continue, you have a K type of scenario in most of the changes, and changes may happen faster than you think. This is not an easy problem to manage. And this is where a lot of discussions like this that can inspire minds, that can open minds, can create a lot of positive value for the society as well. So I know we're going to talk about the cities, but I want to start by the first piece. The context of the digital city is the context of change. It is not a new concept. It's an evolution of what has been underway. So So the second piece now, let me introduce cities as the platform for change, cities as the platform for innovation, cities as the platform for creating new thinking. And so I will claim and say cities are at the center of change to create exponential opportunities and solve for existential challenges. Okay? This is the second claim I'm making. So first piece is change. Second is cities have to take a better leadership role in managing that. Let's start with, I'll give you some examples. These are real examples. These are here and now. So this is not something pie in the sky, something in the future. A city powered by hydrogen fuel cells, fully autonomous system, no human-driven systems or human-powered system or human-operated systems will be allowed in the city. Okay? And ultimately, the objective of the city is the quality of life. Okay? Now, if I remove that top tier, you will see the Mount Fuji in the background, and if you wanted to know which city it is Toyota Woven City. So Toyota wanted to say, I'm in the business of happiness, I'm in the business of quality of life. How do I go showcase all the things I have in my entire arsenal to create a vision for the city? This city will be ready in next 3 years or so, which means there is nothing else possible unless you are part of those autonomous systems. Okay, let me give you some more examples. So again, cities are the platform for managing change and creating opportunity. That's the second claim, and this is the first picture I showed you in the second claim. First claim was change is here, change will continue. Second one is cities have to take a better role, and cities are taking the role. This is a city, hyper-connected, sustainable, greenfield, global megapolis powered by AI that is being bet by entire country to build a new economic model. $500 billion is going into this city to build. And this city is a greenfield city today. But the country is saying that I cannot build my future unless this city is successful, unless this city makes it happen. And if you wanted to know what that city is, it's called Neom. It's in the Black Sea part of the Saudi Arabia, where a brand new city is built up called Neom. So it will be ready within 5 years. And again, these are the things publicly available, and you can see in those scenarios as well. But audacity of vision, the courage to go make the changes, and really being able to say, this is our future, that means I cannot rely on petrodollars anymore. I have to really build a next generation city that can be economic driver for us, is what Saudi Arabia is betting on. Third city, a city that zero waste to landfills by 2030, consumes 100% clean electricity by 2040, and 100% carbon neutral by 2050. Now that skyline is easy, so I'll tell you that's New York City. But again, you can see this is not just about economic model, this is not just about automation, this is also about sustainability. And that's important as well. Some cities are betting big on that. And the fourth one, again, no paperless city. By end of this year, this city will be paperless. No more paper allowed in any government office, in any interaction, in any retail store. At least that's on paper. But if not this year, it will be next year. No more paper for anything, including land records, which is the hardest one to move off of. And that's Dubai. And the last one, of course, is our favorite city. This is, you know how Singapore is betting big, which is adding 100 hectares of green spaces by 2035, green 80% of its building by 2030, and increase sustainable local food sourcing by 2030 as well. Again, these are different directions where cities are coming from, but they're managing change. They are solving problems that could be existential problem or that could be disruptive issues, but then finally they're creating an economic model that could be exponentially beneficial as well. So it's not just about managing the risk, it's also about creating opportunity. It's also about making its citizens prosperous and making cities more relevant. And if you wanted to see some examples of how cities lose the way, I'll show you in a minute. So that's why I'm saying is that cities that don't keep pace with this, they actually end up atrophying and ultimately dying as well. So So here is the examples. And I told you that this is the cities over 100 years and 200 years, and I can talk about each of these cities, how Boston has become center of innovation and biotech, how they have increased the ability to attract foreign talent, how Dubai has, as I mentioned, some other example, how Singapore has changed, how London has changed. But at the same time, I can also give you Detroit. Detroit, who was leading the industrial transformation, atrophied and went bankrupt. And again, a lot of people from Detroit are very proud of the city. It doesn't mean we take anything away from the city, but it is to say that even today, when Ford is putting its next generation auto innovation center, they're putting in Palo Alto, not in Detroit, right? That tells you it's not able to attract. University of Michigan, leading in autonomous system and computer science, is right next door. And yet that talent doesn't stay in Michigan and in Detroit. So there is something fundamentally that the Detroit planners have to think about as well. So I told you I'll show you how digital city is an evolution for what has been taking place. And I'll make that case. So here is the 7 factors. If you go back and study all these cities that have become successful at certain time, have had in place, at least 3 to 4 have to be in place. Transportation, talent feeder, universities are very important, city centers are important, specialization and the clustering is important, ecosystem, industry production, and proximity and connectivity. All of these things, part of these things have made cities successful in the past. These were the drivers. If you really study what makes city hum, 4 or higher number of factors exist in a city. That's why I think if someone comes and says, I want to go build an innovative city, it's not possible unless they have access to universities that are world-class in proximity. And to build a world-class university is a 50, 100-year-long affair, not a 5, 10-year affair. It takes time to build that institutes. So while these things have been there is some bigger drive which exists. And this is a fantastic quote I read. Aspirings have always looked for higher leverage. Okay? That means people who are aspiring, they have always found a way to go to the cities where they have found better leverage because of some of these factors. Whether it was connectivity, it was university, whether it was ecosystem and interaction with others, that has been the place. And what we see today is that is the reason why migration is increasing. If I give you a scenario that 68% of the world population would live in the 4% of land mass, 68% people and 4% of land mass, that's the direction we're headed in 2050. So give or take, 70% of people will live in less than 5% of our land. And citizens are becoming more digital, autonomous things are changing, growth models are changing, and global crises are there. Today, we're looking at pandemic. Tomorrow, sustainability. Sustainability is in between, there will be social issues that will come up as well. So you are talking about pandemic, social, sustainability, in that order. These issues are not going away. So what happens is, in addition to that, now you have a working from home, working from anywhere, all of these factors coming in. So you saw aspirings needs more leverage. Cities' 7 growth drivers are not enough. Now you have people working from anywhere, all of these factors. These are the factors going in. So just keep that in mind. When I make the case for digital city, these are the factors that will make this a much more enduring outcome versus a scenario which is a nice to have or flash in the pan or something that is just done by technology industry for sake of technology outcomes. So let me put this as a statement, because we have worked on so many statements of digital cities, but then I said, why don't we take it the simplest one? Let me go back. A digital city is a city that is a thriving city. Simple as that. And the context is, 4th industrial revolution is upon us. We're right in the middle of it. And this is thriving city, both in terms of creating exponential opportunities, but also be able to manage disruptive challenges it faces. That is the simplest one. We need technology not to showcase technology, but to solve the new problems we have, but to create the outcomes our citizens expect, but to make sure city is thriving and alive. That's the direction, and that trend has been in place for the last few hundred years. Technology is just an enabler to continue to increase leverage, continue to create economic prosperity, continue to make sure city is more relevant and thriving. That's the whole thing. Forget about today, it may be digital twin that is hot. Tomorrow it might be augmented reality, year after something else. Technology will come and go. But the key thesis is, what can cities use to be way more successful, way more thriving, way more relevant? Because if they don't do that, you recall the change in terms of GDP. Just like countries lose relevance, so does cities. And I gave you examples of the city's relevance as well. So that's the idea. That's the idea of digital city, and that's why it's not tied to a technology. It's not tied to anything else. It is. We even call it digital because we are in the middle of data era, middle of the digitization drive. Just like steam engine drove the big success for certain countries, similarly, technology is going to create that success for certain cities and certain countries. That's the core idea behind digital city. Now, if we have now talked about change and a digital city as a concept, let's double click into it. What is it? It's because some of you may be from computer science as well, and you want to know how to get it done. We'll talk about that as well. So ultimately, new possibilities, unprecedented opportunity for economic growth and human progress. That's what we are trying to do. And again, these are the 6 use cases which we are seeing across the world today. From a technology perspective. Autonomous mobility, sustainable energy sources. You have AI-driven public safety and emergency response. Government as an app. That means you never have to visit government office ever, anywhere. Predictive analytics and telemedicine. And IoT-enabled waste management, circular economy, and making sure there's more sustainability. Again, these are the 6 use cases. I showed you city by city some of this, right? So these are the things getting in place today. And they're getting more mainstream. I'm sure more and more examples will come up, but the framework that I'll introduce you from a digital city perspective will ensure that no matter if the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th outcome is required by the city, they can go make that happen, okay? So again, we have talked about change. That is always going to continue. We've talked about cities' importance, why digital city is just an extension of how cities have been evolving, and these are some of the use cases that we are seeing in the digital city scenario. Now here is some of the technology scenario, this is where we get into buzzword, right? I mean, this is all the stuff that you need in your resumes and everything else. But again, so far I have made the case that none of these buzzwords matter for a digital city. What matters most is that economic prosperity, sustainability, and many other things, but this is where we start to switch on how to make those things possible. So you have 5G, edge, data management, multi-cloud, cybersecurity, modern application architecture, AI, ML coming together. That leads to automation, computer vision, GIS, and predictive analytics, and so on and so forth. And at the citizen level is the outcome at the top level. Public safety, urban mobility, green and sustainable, citizen health, and e-gov services, okay? So fundamentally, what you may learn in a class is at the bottom layer. Middle is what confluence of multiple technology make it possible. And then finally, citizen level outcome is at the top. Now I'll go a little bit technically deeper in next 2 slides, but I promise you I'll spend 10 seconds. So if you don't want to pay attention for next 10 seconds, that's perfectly fine if you don't come from the technology orientation. But I caution you that from here, next 2 slides will go a little deeper and you're like, oh my God, am I in the classroom? But no, you're not. But I'm just telling you because it becomes very important for you to think about what's next. So these are the 7 factors that we talked about. The cities at the bottom, yellow color, is what the cities have been doing all along to be successful. And what I'm claiming is the eighth factor is now at the top, which is this digital and technology transformation. So it is not that cities can completely think about digital only. They have to think about all the 7 factors which have made cities successful. At least 4 of them have to be true in a city to be successful. And now I'm saying the 8th factor is technology as well. And I would claim that that's probably the most important factor. And now you have cities have to think about what is the leadership and the governance model and policy model, what is the operating model, and how to engage community. This is more from a city administrator perspective, city planner perspective, government leader perspective. And then they have to think about what is finally they are committing to their citizens. Are we going to be inclusive? Are we going to be sustainable? Are we going to be resilient? Are we going to be secure? Are we going to be efficient? Are we going to be competitive? I think some of those factors have to be thought, and which choices you make will determine how you design the next layer and what factors out of the A factors you pick, factor after that. And ultimately, no matter how you implement, digital city is a system of systems. You really can't do everything in one go. You have to work with, no matter which technology provider brings you this, no matter when the decision was made, by whom it was made, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, all of those technology assets, all of those assets have to be used, which means it's not a one technology that solves it. You have to really architect this as, I have a digital core, which is a citizen outcome, and then I have to be able to manage entire system of systems that exist no matter where it exists. So city as an API is what the model becomes, and that's the modern architecture where you say, I just want to give a command and I want to get an output, right? And that city as an API, you can say, I'm solving for this citizen experience, I'm solving for this agency, could be police, could be traffic, I'm solving for this value-added experience, could be any payment financial model, any outcome, and then you can have different operating processes as well. This is the framework that can help you execute system of systems and really make digital city a living, thriving city that is on a journey to being more competitive, to creating more exponential growth and exponential value creation for its citizens. Now, a few more things before we come to more human side of things. These are the things that is happening. If you want to learn about technology, think about these factors: pervasive and adaptive intelligence, decentralization of everything, combinatorial benefits that you have to also bring from innovation perspective, next-gen human-machine interface, and of course, the personalized and customized world that you have to build. Again, I won't go into this, but since you come from many backgrounds, students, I want to give you these things to think about. These things will be pervasive in a successful digital city. Now, how do you do this on a rapid basis? I think you have to think about people, process, and technology. There's a lot of agile development frameworks. I won't go into how to do this fast, but ultimately, there is a whole science of how to build a system of system using hybrid and heterogeneous technology, keeping it secure, and doing it fast. I think that's the journey every city has to be on, or particularly all the successful cities have to be on. Computer science has evolved so much that what used to take hours, we're getting it done in minutes. Cost of technology continue to drop. So the outcomes that are possible from a digitization of city is exponentially better. And I think that's how the cities will lead in the future. So now, as I mentioned, I will talk about the human side of things. I will start by this statement. So far we have talked about changes ever present. We talked about cities as the platform for creating economic success and a growth model. Cities as the change agents to manage the existential challenges. A digital city as a concept, which is a city that is thriving and taking advantage of new opportunities. And technology as the extension of the 7 factors that have made cities successful so far. So this becomes the 8th factor. Then we talked about how to do digital city, system of systems, some of the technology framework and architecture, city as an API. That's the piece that we introduced as well. Again, that was the most dense part of this because I kind of feel like this is the part, as I cautioned to you, this is where we went deep into tech, and now we're coming back to, if people, process, and technology is so important, we'll talk about people. And this is the only one slide. And this is the slide that, as a parent, I have to think a lot as well, because I have a 17-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son, and they often challenge me on many of these things, So you have the best critic of yourself at home and unbridled one too. So I'll start with this one. And this is a statement that, and again, I kind of still find it hard to believe that it's so close, that 85% of the jobs that exist in 2030 haven't been invented yet. Let's just say it's hyperbole. Let's say it's 60%. Let's say it's 50%. Let's say even 85% is not true. I could believe 40 to 50% of jobs will be brand new type of jobs. In fact, I have a beautiful chart that says what were the best paying jobs in 1963, 73, 83, 93, and it's just like I showed you, companies don't make it, job profiles keep changing. What's relevant in each decade keep changing. So let's stay for a minute that in this decade, by end of this decade, 50% of the jobs will be brand new jobs. Now, first challenge is, if you are in academia, how do you prepare students for something that you don't even know what exists, right? I mean, in fact, if you are in the tertiary education, if you're on the college, you at least can see that, hey, in 4 years, I'll be in the job market, I know what it is. But if your kids are going to middle school, like one of my kids is, and one of my kids is in high school, this thing is 7, 8, 10 years out. How do you prepare them for a future that we don't even know? If autonomous nature of things in the city is commonplace, what kind of jobs does it create? What kind of expectations does it have? Imagine if you drive a car, your insurance goes up 10x versus if a car drives you. Imagine just that fact itself will change the dynamic of people driving their car or not. So first piece I'll say is that fundamentally the change is going to impact the human side of equation significantly more than anything else. Okay, and that's why I'm keeping this topic for the last, and I want to speak for something that I have been thinking about quite a bit. And it doesn't mean I have all the answers or I have the right answers. I just want to share with you what I know and what I think. Because this thing is, just like we talked about social issues, sustainability issues are the topics of our time, this is going to be topic of our time. So I would just say, as I said before, one way for me to tell my children is to say, change is constant. You have to get ready to keep changing all through your life. What is relevant today, what is relevant tomorrow may be different, which means your mindset becomes very, very important. For your ability to continually learn and disrupt yourself or make yourself more exponential as the time progresses becomes way more important. The new skills, just like we talked about, aspirings always look for higher leverage. New technology tools give such a tremendous leverage today. How are we preparing our kids to take advantage of that? I was in Auckland, and I was meeting with the chancellor at the University of Auckland, and I asked her, nowadays the kids, your intake coming in must really be technology savvy. And there was a pause, and she said, no, it's quite the contrary. Everybody thinks they know how to use Facebook and the LinkedIn and the YouTube and all the tools that has been provided. But they're not coming in with the mindset of builders, they're coming with the mindset of users. I need more people who are dreamers and builders, less people who are manager and operators, okay? And that's my second point here. It's fundamentally, there are very few people. The leverage has gone so high that few people deeper in a topic can dream up and build something that is a lot more disruptive, a lot more powerful, a lot more value creating, versus in the past, we have used a significant amount of white collar jobs to be thinking about manager and operator. Those jobs are getting automated. Value is shifting from manager operator to dreamer builder side. I think that's a very important point for curriculum designers, for students, for you to think about how do you build muscles. Just like anything else, resilience can be a muscle, grit can be a muscle. Dreaming and building something is a muscle. That has to be built. It's not possible for society to create the kind of jobs it has created in the past. There will be a lot of service jobs, a lot of gig economy jobs, but there is a significant value shifting to people who can dream and build and do things that they dream of. So that's, I think, is a second point. And of course, we can chat more on this. And this is the third piece. I think there's a statement that you arrive at the same place, but see it with different set of eyes. Today, technology with a domain expertise will give you new tools, new leverage to create exponential outcomes. Today, vaccines would not be possible to build in the record times that we have built. And the reason for that is we have tremendous AI model to be able to search for new molecules, to be able to parse out what is going to work and what is not going to work. So how chemistry, biology, I mean, if you want to look how to use biology to build a completely new class of manufacturing company, look at a company called Ginkgo Bioworks. They're saying the way we have been building and manufacturing things is not sustainable because we haven't used biology to go make something, to manufacture something. Now, if we can manipulate biology to manufacture something, sustainability issues go away. Again, think about that, the conviction behind something, the courage behind something. So all the technology is doing is giving domains a tremendous amount of leverage to go create better outcomes. We will discover new materials. We will discover new medicines. We will discover new ways of living. And it's going to be a combination of technology and with the domain. And finally, as I said, best way to predict future is to build it. This is where the leadership comes in. Leadership on our part, some of you students who are going to be in the decision-making capacity and the leadership capacity. And this is where you will have the opportunity to say, what choices are we going to make? What do we envision? Who we are? I think some of these societal and philosophical topics also become important. So if I'm designing a great curriculum, and not that I'm good at it, but I'm saying if my kids, I'm coaching them, I would say, one, do not lose, first of all, ready to manage changes. Changes will happen and you'll have to continuously learn along the way. That's one point. Second, think about what is deeply inside you, what is personal to you, what do you dream, what do you really want to build, what is it that you want to dedicate your life to? I think that's very important. Finding your passion becomes very important. Third, do not lose specialization. Technology will come and go. What is important is you gotta have to specialize in one field and then use technology to increase your leverage. But do not think, some folks will go into technology, but now if software starts to write software, you see, you ultimately come back to other domains, which can use technology to create better outcome. So those domains become very important. And finally, remember, we have a responsibility towards each other. We can envision and we can make something real and really drive human progress possibilities as well. I think that's the piece I say, digital city, while we can talk about technology, relevance from a city's perspective, we can talk about change management, but at the end of the day, it's about a human problem where people are evolving, people are achieving their full potential, and society in aggregate is benefiting and prospering and more sustainable. With that, I thank you very much for your time and look forward to panel and more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mida. Please take your seat on stage, Mr. Mida. I'd now like to invite the panelists and Professor Kong on stage to join Mr. Mida. We look forward to a lively discussion.
So, mic check, you can hear me? Great, thank you. Let me begin by thanking Amit for a fascinating discussion. Thank you for a wonderful half an hour. And, I'll bet you have many fans out there amongst our students now. Let me begin by saying that, Amit reminded us, in a sense, that change is perhaps the only constant and that cities have a lead role to play in this change. Cities are change agents to manage the existential challenges that we face today. And the city, the digital city of the future that he's painted is one that is, right, AI-powered, sustainable, with new models of growth, but at the end of the day, what it comes down to is the power of the human imagination and power of the human individual in making these changes. He does ask the question, what are the capabilities critical for the next phase of city transformation as such? Now, I would suggest that the making of a city is not so much a science as it is an art. And it is the result of planned and deliberate actions, but it's also a host of serendipitous, organic, individual, social actions. And it is that potent mix together with technology that I think is what is going to make the digital city of the future as such. Now, we have with us this afternoon a very distinguished panel of speakers who will share with us, together with Amit, their thoughts about what digital cities of the future are. Who will plan and organize and fund and develop these cities? In what dimensions of city living will that transformation be most taking place in? With what kinds of technology and with what level of individual human agency, right? And I'd like to begin by introducing our panel members very briefly. They're all very distinguished, so I'm not going to be able to do justice to them in the short time that I have, but I would rather privilege the time for hearing their thoughts than in sort of long introductions. So as with Amit, I will give a shortened introduction of each of them. I begin with this gentleman on my left, Mr. Tan Kok Yam. Kok Yam is the Deputy Secretary for Smart Nation and Digital Government, and this is an office in the Prime Minister's office. He is responsible for the plans to realize projects for the Smart Nation, to raise quality and interoperability of government IT and smart systems, to grow ICT-related capabilities for government, and engage citizens and businesses to be part of the Smart Nation journey. So we do have with us here a representative and a chief representative of government as such. We're delighted also to have with us Julian Loh. Julian is Executive Vice President of Enterprise Partnerships for Asia Pacific at MasterCard. And I will ask her to share with us a little bit about what MasterCard is. It's not just a credit card company, right? She drives partnerships across new industries with a focus on growing MasterCard's global cities, travel and tourism, trade and business development initiatives across the region. And last but not least, I'm delighted that we have with us Achan Misra. Achan is Vice Provost Research and a Professor of Computer Science here at Singapore Management University. Over the past decade at SMU, Achan has established and provided leadership to multiple research centers with over $50 million in research funding. He works at the interface of both academic and translational research. Through the centers that he has led, Achan has deployed a variety of IoT and analytics-driven applications in partnership with government agencies and private enterprises, all of which are designed to impact domains such as municipal operations, lifestyle and wellness, and retail and hospitality. Achan was actually previously at IBM Research and Bellcore, and so you can see that connection between academia and industry as such. So delighted to have all of you with us. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, let me begin with perhaps a question at the beginning. As Alice in Wonderland would say, let's begin at the beginning. We have heard from Amit about what a digital city is, and I tried to scribble as a good student would as you were speaking. And I think you said that a digital city is one that thrives in the fourth industrial revolution. It is one that embraces disruptive possibilities, and the disruptive possibilities particularly of the data era of the future. I'm going to turn to panel members and ask you what you think a smart city or a digital city is, because in my own research on smart cities, I have found that it's almost like feeling different parts of the elephant. Different people think of the smart city or the digital city in different ways. So I'm going to begin by turning to Kok Yam. It's dangerous to always sit next to the professor because you're the first one who gets called on. We're going to ask Kok Yam what you think your conception of the digital city of the future might be.
Yes. Hello, you can hear me? Great. Yes, Prof, I'll try to answer that as well as I can. Let me start first by perhaps giving almost non-digital definition of a smart city. And I think there are 2 points. One, I think as Amit had eloquently already put in his presentation, is about the ability of the city to respond to change. Being able to, whether it is about long-term change in the economy, or it's about short-term change even, such as the arrival of a pandemic, for example. So a smart city is one that's responsive. I think the second thing about smart city is that it is able, a city operate as again, as you put it, as a system of systems. And a smart city, in my view, has to be one that has to be able to maximize and synergize across these systems. One of the things that has personally impressed me when I read is how we are looking at using, for example, mangrove swamps for coastal protection. So it meets both the idea of nature conservation and it meets the requirement for coastal protection. Let's bring two things together and addressing it in a very, well, I can't think of a better word, so in a very smart way, bringing these two together. And I think the digital overlay to that is that because you have now an ability to use analytics, to collect information, to be able to map out the dependencies for planning, for building, and for running the city, you are able to do a lot more of that. You are able to be a lot more responsive. You are able to synergize across different systems that run the city. And I think that's where the digital aspect helps the smart aspect. And all this is so that we have a city that is better able to provide a high quality of life, to reduce the resource and carbon footprint, and also to allow people to explore, to imagine, to have those organic interactions and so on. So that this is my definition of a smart city and where digital technology plays its part.
So that's an excellent start, a non-digital answer to what a digital city is as such. Julian, what do you think?
Well, thank you very much for that, the response. And Amit, thank you very much for the very insightful presentation as well. I could have sworn that, it's something that we talk very often in MasterCard. And also thank you, SMU, for having MasterCard here. And we were just talking over tea break that MasterCard, are you just a credit card company? And we often say that, we are the original fintech. MasterCard, we are a technology company, global technology firm, who happens to be in the payments industry. And every day, we power and we connect, people to make transactions safe, secure, accessible. And so when we think about, and driving the entire inclusive economy. So when we think about what smart city or digital city is all about, we look at technology being the enabler, as what Amit has said earlier on, technology being the enabler to be able to solve for the problems within the city in itself. And so it has to be people-focused, leveraging the technology. I recall back in 2010 when I was having a conversation with the LTA as well as Transit Link. And the whole idea then, and those of you who are familiar with taking trains, those days you actually have to either buy a monthly pass or have to fumble, your pocket for coins or for your, to try to find the ticket to actually enter into the train station. And the conversation was around how can MasterCard actually come in and help to be able to move people using the same technology that we have at point of sale to move people through the turnstile. And so that was back in 2010. And I think, back in 2019, pre even COVID days, we actually do see people, in fact, 250,000 trips per day using the same technology that powers technology at point of sale to go through the turnstile. So net, digital city, one that uses the technology to advance sustainable urban development. And within it, we do have, City Possible within MasterCard as well, which is a partnership-led model where MasterCard, bring together public-private sectors, stakeholders to share ideas and solution in terms of how we can even make a more sustainable, long-term development.
Thank you. A very people-focused, technology enabler kind of approach to it. Achan, what do you think?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me here. Before I answer your question, I want to use maybe this hospitable terrain to actually, Amit, you open my eyes with the 85% of jobs. I'm fervently hoping that the job of a university professor is in the other 15%.
I'm with you there.
Lily would agree with that, and I think this is a particularly hospitable terrain to make that claim. I'll give you a very conventional definition first, but I'll expand on it. So I do think, like almost everybody else, to me a smart, digital city is one that uses ICT, information communication technologies, but it has three stakeholders. So the first stakeholder is the government or the municipal organization itself. So he wants to make the municipal services more efficient. That, to me, is the first criteria. The other two stakeholders are individuals and businesses. And I know I've said this in the past that, in the evolution of smart city, including in Singapore, the business aspect has not been emphasized as much to date. But I also think, there was a definition out of the UK which said there is no single definition of a smart city because it's an evolving target. Because challenges appear, you just continue to optimize your processes. So from that perspective, I think there is, in my view, we're now in the fourth generation or approaching the fourth generation of a smart city. So the first generation, to me, was really about reducing the friction between an individual and government. This is e-governance, the ability to see everything online, transact online. The second one was applying analytics, but really applying analytics for more like safety and problem solving, such as taking care of where rat infestations would happen, and applying sort of spatial analytics to understand how to better deploy buses on which routes and so on. The third wave, which we're currently in, I believe, is making the city more efficient in real time. So this is the technologies that allow you to optimize the traffic lights, so make them adaptive so that as traffic volumes change, the lighting conditions change. So that's a technological thing. I believe the fourth one, which we're coming to now, and Amit has definitely alluded to it, is the focus on sustainability. Because as a city, as 85% or 70% move to the city, we're just consuming in an unsustainable rate. And I think that's going to be the centerpiece of the next 5 to 10 years of technological evolution or change in the city.
So thank you very much, Achan. And I like the way in which you frame the stakeholder groups in terms of government, in terms of individuals, and in terms of business, and the different phases that you've talked about. But let me take that framework that you articulated of government, individuals, and business, and let's just explore that a little bit more. The making of a digital city is not the responsibility of any one of those stakeholders. It is the combination of all of that that can make a successful digital city or not. And we actually have here a representative from government. And so I wanted to turn to Kok Yam again and say, if we take the example of Singapore and its smart nation or smart city journey as such, what would you say are the key roles of government in the making of the digital city, knowing that there are some things that are maybe better done by the private sector and some things that actually we have to leave for human agency and individual agency. But from the perspective of government, how would you conceptualize its roles?
I would say that the government has two key roles. The first role is that it itself has to be digital. So it provides municipal services, it does city planning, it sets rules and regulations. So in all these functions, the public sector has to embrace the possibilities of digital technology to just do its work better, to make better decisions, to serve the citizenry, to help businesses. So that is the first role of the public sector in making the city smart. I think the second role is that government, because of its role as an enabler, as a regulator, has the role of facilitating smartness within companies and also for individuals. So one way to do this is through like regulation. Another way that we are increasingly exploring is by putting in place certain platforms and standards that both government and the private sector can use, can interoperate on, and so on. So the Pay Now framework, which allows for the sort of interbank exchange of interbank transactions that enables different apps by different financial institutions sit on top. That's an example. Getting the national digital identity correct, which again allows for different companies. We started with banks, but then we are going to move to a lot more other sectors. Allows different companies to make use of a national identity framework to offer services. And that's another example of how we would make some of these digital utilities available so that companies and individuals can focus on the task of innovation without having to worry about these utilities. So I think two roles. One is getting our own digitalization right. The second role is a catalyst as an enabler of wider transformation, hence Smart Nation.
That's great, thank you. And I'm just going to follow up on that a little bit. Singapore is actually quite unique in that we don't have multiple layers of government in the way that a far bigger country has, with the national level government, the provincial, the city government, and so forth. And I'm mindful that we have an audience from different parts of the world. Thank you for joining us. What do you think this does for us, and how do you think some of the benefits of a small nation get complicated when you have a larger context?
When I meet some of my colleagues from overseas, I would joke that they face an exponential set of difficulties in terms of getting things approved and so on, because they do have to deal with the federal level, the state level, and the city level. So as a one-stop shop, is that right? Well, as a one-layer government, because of our small size, we do have certain advantages, and sometimes in certain areas, we really have no excuse if we don't make progress in these areas. We can make use of synergies across different departments because we are in one. We just have to deal across ministries, not you don't have to deal vertically with the state or with the federal government. We are the federal government. Of course, small is not always beautiful. There are advantages of scale. You can see the sort of progress made in China and so on. That scale does come in. Scale does count. Size does count sometimes. And so we have to make use of nimbleness to sort of overcome that disadvantage. Hence, for example, in the area of digital payments, we don't take, the Chinese approach where one or two particular vendors sort of dominate the market. We have an open platform, and we allow for that ecosystem of different players to come in and to provide their innovative services on top. So we have to take a somewhat different approach.
Thank you. And I would say that, clearly the public sector has a role to play, amongst other things in terms of, regulatory frameworks, governance frameworks, and so forth. But so too does the private sector have an important role to play and to contribute. And, we have representatives here from the private sector. I wonder what you think might be the contributions of the private sector. And Amit first, and perhaps Julian.
Yeah. So first of all, I wanted to speak about the government piece first, because I kind of look at this on a global basis, and it's an important topic. And I think if you think about a race car driver, when you're going into the corner, you have to brake first before the corner has come in. And you have to accelerate first before you even are out of the turn. That's how you can do sharp turns. And in this racing, it's not about who can drive it on the straight path. It's really about what is your human endurance and who can turn fast. My point is that a lot of these changes that we see, technological change, industrial revolution, the victor is the one who can turn the corner the best way, okay? I just want to, first of all, living here as a Singaporean, I wanted to give a shout out to Singapore as a nation, as a city, as a society, that how well we are turning the corner, even in this pandemic. I think this is probably not celebrated enough, and I think we should be celebrating that, because I see lack of leadership, lack of speed, lot of turning the corner, so to speak, across the world. There's a lot of examples of that. There are very few examples where the turning the corner, where the human values are being done well. So I just wanted to say that. Now, coming back to the role of corporations, the businesses in making digital city happen, at the end of the day, the businesses will optimize for their shareholders, for their employees, for their customers. And digital cities have to create that set of opportunities that make them more efficient, make their economic model exportable, make them more successful no matter which countries they work in. At the end of the day, they don't want to build digital city for sake of digital city. They want to be part of digital city. They want to take the best practice because it serves their constituents better. So in my mind, we as a technology provider have a vested interest in making digital cities happen. But for any other business, their fundamental ask is going to be, will this make me more successful? Will this engage my team members better? Will it create a better society for my children who are going to live in this country? Those are the key values. Will this create opportunities for my daughter and who may not have had better opportunities? Is this going to be inclusive society? Those are the possibilities. What technology provides is a platform for city administrators to enable things that are more transparent, more sustainable, more inclusive, and of course, more economically progressive. That's the piece I see. Businesses should have a voice. There are ills of this that could be, surveillance could get out of hand in many countries. It could be a scenario where using this platform, government is deciding who's going to be successful and who's not. So that's non-fair scenario. All of those things businesses should have a voice on. But I think this ultimately is there to help build a better society and to help businesses become more efficient and successful and globalized.
So thank you for that. And in a sense, it's a very uplifting vision of what corporations' role might be. But if I might just push back a little bit and
Sure.
say, be the voice of the critics who say that, in the private sector or corporations, as you say, it's about optimizing or maximizing stakeholder benefits. And tech companies want to come in to create the digital city because they want to sell the technology fast and big. And it's about profit motivation and so forth. How would you balance and counter that view?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, this concept of smart city, smart nation, or just say smart planet has been around for the last 20 years. And it didn't go anywhere because it was a technology outcome for technology's sake. It really did not translate into citizen outcomes. It did not really enable a vision of the leader of the country to be manifested in a better way in the marketplace. I think today the maturity of the technology is such that transparency can be there, sustainability can be there. So I think now is the right time to be thinking about it. Second, we're going through a big turn, whether it's pandemic, whether fourth industrial revolution. So while this is a challenge, it's also an opportunity. So which nation, which society, and for that matter, which individual who will take this opportunity of this turn is the piece. So to me, to me, even if I was not sitting here coming from a technology industry, my challenge as a parent and my challenge as a citizen is going to be, how will we make this turn possible? How will we make sure the changes that have been happening for 2,000 plus years, how can we be more relevant as a Singapore, as a Singaporean, as a Singapore nation, and the concept of Singapore? How do we do that? That's the opportunity. So to me, digital city is something that may be with us for 10, 20, 30 years. Then after that, it's just another factor. Something else will come up. But the point is about managing the turn. The point is about fourth industrial revolution and the opportunities it represents.
Thank you. I'm going to give Julian the mic.
Yeah. I think companies from the private sector, I mean, I talked about it earlier on about the private-public partnership, and therefore companies should view the government as partners and also as, and potentially even customers in terms of how we actually solve the problem together. So the government comes up with policy, comes up with the infrastructure, but it is I would say, the technology, the experiences that the companies from the private sector brings that will be able to then drive similar and more impactful outcome. Because at the end of the day, I think the goals are pretty aligned. The outcomes that the companies, the citizens, and the government in the city wants to drive are similar. So that's where we want to use that technology that we have to be able to drive towards that outcome. Maybe I give an example of what we use our technology for during the COVID, in the last 12 months, and we're still undergoing through the pandemic. Over the last, 12, 14 months, we have done over 100 initiatives globally with governments across 35 countries to be able to say, how do we actually help and solve for the issues that they face, whether it is in SMEs, whether it is for residents or for the residents in the cities, and one of them is in the city of Makati, that's in the Philippines. How do we actually disburse funds to the local municipality of the Makati itself? So we worked through the MasterCard GCash prepaid MasterCard to disburse funds into over 100,000 of the residents in that city itself. And that's one way where we actually work with the government through the technology that we actually have in the cards that people already have in the wallet to be able to get the funds across to them who need it most. And you talk a little bit about the PayNow, and people will be very surprised every time I mention that PayNow, it's a technology that's powered by MasterCard. Right? We always think that we are a card company, but we are a multi-rail account to account. We enable, underlying it is the technology that we enable, transactions to take place securely, seamlessly, and it's accessible for everyone.
Thank you. We talk about the major players, the government, the corporations, and so forth. What is the role of the individual in the making of a digital city? I'll open it up to see who would like to go first.
Well, I would.
Amit
I think
and
I.
then Achan, okay.
Maybe. No. Please,
ahead, Amit.
please. I mean, I insist.
No, so I think this is a great question to which I really don't have perfect answers, but I know, this is a conversation we've had, Lily. I've followed your literature about how some of the, propagation of technology often has sort of a hegemonic nature to it. Everybody needs a smartphone now. Without it, you can't access certain kinds of technology and so on. But beyond that, I think, there's two aspects to it. One is including citizens, in terms of the design so that they're part of the governance and creation mechanism. And I'll just give examples that I've been aware of. And I thought that were kind of interesting. So in the city of Boston, they have sort of a participatory framework for sort of collecting data and utilizing data. And one particular application that struck me was that they were allowing people to download an app that the data would stay with them, and drivers would collect their data and analyze their own driving habits. So just understand when they were being reckless, making sharp turns, braking hard. This is not data that's flowing to an insurance company and therefore raises the hackles that it will affect your rates. But it's really empowering the individual to realize that their own actions have consequences and hopefully making them a little more responsible citizen. I think the other example that I can give from my sort of intimate knowledge of some of my colleagues' research work going on, we have very popular health promotion board, Healthy 365 app, National Steps Challenge. And of course, there's a majority of people sitting here, and they probably all signed up for the perks. They just want to do the 10,000 steps. But there are other aspects of it. We have colleagues who've been doing the AI work that allows you to take pictures, automatically annotate the food that they're consuming, so that reduces the friction in you logging your own food. But what it does down the road, it actually helps build up that food knowledge graph, that who's consuming what, how are the food habits changing, what items are being more popular. And in the long run, that'll allow us to, the technologists to offer personalized recommendations that will actually benefit individuals. So I think the role of the citizen over here is to be embracing of this opportunity, because in the end, if we all don't generate that data, it's not going to come back to benefit us individually. So creating that virtuous cycle, I think is some of the responsibility falls on the individuals.
Thank you. Amit, your thoughts?
Sure. So I think this is a topic that I have thought a lot about. But first of all, I will start by saying many times countries shut down to outside world, and you saw how China basically went down in terms of the mix of the GDP. It was because they stopped interaction for others, and they were afraid of the changes. And of course, you can see now they're accepting changes and how they're leading changes. But first and foremost, I would say is change or any crisis, it has, it's a danger and opportunity together, Weiji, right? So to me, this is every moment, and it seems to be happening more often we think, this is a Weiji moment. Which side of the equation are you going to fall? Are you going to see this as a crisis, or are you going to see this as an opportunity? And one piece I would tell you is you could say, yep, 85% of jobs will be different, so I don't know what I'm going to do about it. But at the same time, if you look at the history, better quality jobs have always been created. So leaning in to the change will serve you better than staying on the sideline. So that's the point one. But it doesn't mean submitting to change without using your own mind and heart and soul. You have to make the voice be known so the changes are more balanced, more representative of all the constituents. And I think that's how the better, more resilient society can be built. If you think about as a aeroplane or intercountry travel through planes, it took decades for that system to stabilize. How the airport is supposed to look like, who's going to administer what. Cars didn't used to have airbags or seat belts. Speed used to be much lower. All of the system got changed. It took a few decades to get stabilized. And we built a better system, more safer system. Today, the amount of deaths in plane is less than even cars. So, and autonomous cars are planning on changing that down to zero. And again, these are built out of a better system that will serve for many generations to come. But every system change, every societal change comes from its own challenges. And I think that's where we have to lean in, that's where we have to solve for. So my recommendation will be three fronts. One, lean in to the change, and accepting change and adopting change is going to be the name of the game for not only for students, for every citizen as well. And it's going to happen. Right? There is a talk about there will be 4 career changes for people of my child's age. 4 career changes. That means they will have to make a hard left turn in their 50, 60 years of life. And they may even live longer. That's another positive benefit that may come out of this. So these 4 changes means they have to keep pace, so they have to lean in. So that's the point one. The second piece is make sure the system changes that are happening are resilient. You have to be participating in that, not just sitting on the sidelines and throwing stones. I think that's I think is a second one. And the third one, I am now 50, and I'm sure 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, when the new changes will show up, I may have trouble adapting to that. So you have to be patient with yourself too. It doesn't mean that it's whoever is bringing change has to make it suitable for all ages and all walks of life, but then we also will have to be patient with ourselves with the changes, not get frustrated, and that's all I think is very important as well. That's how we can build a society that is a new kind of society, a different society, but also more inclusive society.
Very well said.
I'll respond.
Please, yes.
And and give a little bit of that flavor from the viewpoint of the public sector. And what I think is exciting from a public sector's perspective is that these digital platforms allow for active participation of the individuals, as opposed to passive. We are all taxpayers, but I can't say that any one of us is particularly active as a taxpayer. But to be a active participant means you inject a little bit of your skill, your talent, even your character into the contribution. So, for example, quite a few years ago, when we had the APIs open, for example, haze readings, for example, there are people who made apps where the Malayan turns green when the haze is too much. He's sick of the air or something like that. So this kind of sense of humor would not have come from a public sector agency. We had one since 2 years ago. We started a bug bounty program, and we asked individuals to really put our websites to the test, and we rely on the skill and the talent of the white hackers out there, of even young people who just do this as a hobby, but channel in a very constructive way to improve public services, to make public services more secure in the digital realm. And I think this is what makes that type of participation exciting.
Thank you. Julian, would you like to speak to this as well?
I think from the individual perspective, all my distinguished panelists have already given a lot. I would probably just add it with an anecdote, right? I mean, in terms of people, I mean, we are part of the community. And again, to Amit, your point, instead of sitting at the side and letting it go past, I think it's important that we are part of the whole community. It is our role in terms of what we can do within the community using the resources that we have to be able to drive the impact. And I'll give one example. I've got a colleague, young in age, but during the pandemic lockdown, she saw an issue. And that's nothing related to MasterCard work that she is doing. Okay, so this is like the issue of the older generation being in the living in less accessible, even in Singapore, less accessible communities. How do we actually bring food to them during the circuit breaker? How are they going to reach out? If they cannot come out, how do they reach out? And so they create kampong kakis. I think you have probably read a lot about it. It didn't come from the government. It didn't come from the company. It came from the heart of the young people. And they saw the need within the community that she lived in. And she used what she learned, whether it's in university, the practical aspect that she learned in the work that she does in MasterCard, together with a few friends, and they created Kampong Kakis, and that they wanted to use that as a platform to then reach out to the senior citizen living in that community and delivering food and being able to deliver, items, necessity items to them. And so to me, when you look at it, it's when people in the community starts designing solutions, developing issues to solve a real problem, rather than starting with technology as an end in itself. They leverage that as a means to an end.
That's a lovely story and an anecdote to bring to life what technology can do when the community and the individuals out there put their minds to it. It's a good time for me to segue. I think you will know amongst the audience that we had invited you to put in your questions, and many of you have. I have over 30 questions here, and I'll try and curate them. But even as I'm curating them, I continue with the invitation to you, wherever you are in this room, beyond the room, in Singapore, beyond Singapore. If you've got questions, please feel free to submit them, and I'll try and curate them and put them to everyone. And the reason why it's a good time to segue is because precisely in terms of the anecdote that Julian was talking about, there's some questions that kind of link into that, right? So you've talked about the elderly population, the needs that they have, and how the community on its own has responded to that. Now, a question has come in, or actually a series of questions have come in, which I will frame in this way. The questions are around the social impact and the social consequences of the use of technology in society, on different segments of society. So the elderly population who struggle with technology and find it pervasive around them, and how are they to cope with that? Is a digital city a divided one, where there are those who are perfectly comfortable and can avail themselves of everything that technology offers to them, but with a left behind population that struggles without access because they're not comfortable with technology. There's also a set of questions around, how do you retain the human connectedness? So if I will take the privilege of being the moderator to share a story, I'm updating my book on hawker centers in Singapore. It's the most fun project ever because I get to visit hawker centers and eat the food as part of my field work. But there are hawkers who are saying, I just don't want to get on the new platforms. It loses my connection with my customers who are not not sort of an order on an app. They are my friends. I've built up these relationships over time. So how do you ensure that the human connectedness, which is at the end of the day what matters, is not lost, right? And then there is another question to do with unintended consequences. And I think this individual is not thinking necessarily about the unintended consequence of losing the human connectedness, but the question, nevertheless, is about unintended consequences that come about because of use of technology, and how can regulatory frameworks perhaps anticipate some of those unintended consequences better? So briefly, the questions are around the human individual in a technological world and how they are to navigate that. Amit.
I'll take the first one.
Okay.
So human connectedness. So I think this is a very important point, to the point where in our company's vision, we said we are the technology essential infrastructure provider that drives human progress. So for us, human progress is the top of the pyramid, not the technology. So it's very important that we are solving the problem that drives human progress forward. Now, you talked about a very specific issue about connectedness or loneliness, or even I'll extend that, and you didn't say, but I'll extend it. There's a mental health issue or burnout issues. I mean, all of those things are absolutely real. And I think I would say this is very much what I hear from my team members, from many constituents, who may be just engaging in a technology platforms to get their work done. I think this is what's happening. But at the same time, we are making now scenarios to say, can we go build collaboration hubs in the city where people can interact, even if they are not going to offices? Or could we create more meal situations where people can interact with each other? I think these things, this is where balance has to come in. I think we may have gone too far out in this pandemic, and rightfully so, to be disconnected with one another. So I think what the current situation is, that's probably abnormal. But I think probably going back to how we used to be, I don't think that's going to happen either. Because even with vaccination, the infection rates aren't coming down at the level that people expected. So we're going to have to continue with social distancing and masking, and which means technology and technology way of interacting with each other will continue to be important. But and the other piece you talked about is the age gap. And the age gap piece, in my mind, is something that technology providers have to do a better job, in the sense you have to be more inclusive. Simplification, and in many ways, over time, people may just use voice to get something done. So you don't have to think about what is the UI, UX, or you don't have to think about what's the underlying infrastructure. You are just having a conversation. But do I see a society which is dystopian, where we are all disconnected from each other and just working through these voice assistants and virtual assistants and lose human touch? I hope not. And this is the part I just said. Future has to be created by us. We have to think about it. If Singapore is building such an amazing green footprint, much more than before, and people don't get out of their home, they just want to visit the park virtually, that would be such a waste. So human connection and will always be important. I just giving more hugs every day to my family members than before. I think I have become more emotional through this time. I think I have more patience to listen to the stories of people. I'm more authentic to myself than before. And it just makes me feel like that I hope this change can happen on a larger basis. So when we do find the balance, we as a society are more human society.
Thank you. Kok Yam?
let me take the first and the last question perhaps. The first is on digital inclusion, and that's vital. We need to progress in a way that benefits all segments of society. I think in very rough terms, it can be that the problem can be divided into three parts. The first is access, and I remember that when we first went into home-based learning, there were volunteer groups that came together to say, well, there are some kids without laptops, and we need to think of some way to get laptops. They could be second-hand laptops to them, so that they don't lose out just because we go into home-based learning. So the problem of access. The second problem, and Amit, you've spoken about it, is the challenge of design. And you need to be able to design your digital services so that it is not, so that first of all, a normal person knows how to use it, and secondly, someone who is a little bit more maybe digitally less familiar would still be able to use it because we've made it as intuitive as possible. Now, whether it's about using facial recognition to log onto SingPass or some of the voice recognition technologies and so on, these are things that we can practically do to make sure that the friction to adopting digital tools is not too difficult. And the third point that I want to make is that there is also an upside. So many of these technologies, by making it convenient, by reducing the need for physical travel, for example, for the elderly, for those who find it less convenient to travel, actually does improve the quality of life of certain vulnerable groups. And we shouldn't lose that in the conversation about digital inclusion. There's an upside to digital inclusion, and that's about using digital technology to include people who may otherwise be excluded. So I thought that was an important point.
I think that's an absolutely important point. My colleagues in the Center for Research on Successful Aging here at SMU, they've been tracking the elderly population over many years on a monthly basis through their survey. And during COVID, what they did find was that the elderly population that was digitally connected, even at quite a basic level, had a higher level of well-being than those who were not digitally connected. And we mustn't lose sight of the potentiality, the positive potentiality as such. If I might just move on to another set of questions, and I'm interested to cover as many areas as the questions have raised. And this is a set of questions around the technology itself. And there are questions specifically for the technology professor and the technology companies here. So even while we've said that at the end of the day, it's about the human experience and human well-being, technology is the enabler. So let's try and understand that technology a little bit better. There's a question for Archon as the computer science professor about IoT implementations in the near and distant future, and which is the one implementation that you think has the highest positive sum impact on the way people will live their daily lives?
Well, that's a tough one. So I'm going to try to give a partial answer to that, hopefully. So the first thing that I want to say is, there's going to be lots of sensors, as Amit has mentioned, a lot of cloudification and so on. But I want to come back to, in the imminent future, one of the things that I see happening is the ability to adapt the city to this upcoming wave of electrification, electric vehicles. This is something that perhaps we don't appreciate as much because fundamentally what's happening is, yes, we're going to have some renewable energy, but Singapore, that's always going to be a small fraction because we just don't have the land mass to do, solar, et cetera, and completely replace things. So when you have all these electric vehicles, they need to charge. If they're all going to charge overnight, or if all cab drivers are going to, before their shift change at 4 p.m., look for places to go charge, it's going to be unsustainable. The peak demand is going to be very high. So I do think that there is an opportunity here to utilize technologies just as much as we have the Grabs and Gojeks to match customers to drivers. We need to find ways to match drivers to charging points in a way that matches their behavior, that matches overall supply demand, and makes sort of flattens the peak, if you will. Another area in IoT, now of course this is there's a self-centered point of view here. I do think that the future is going to have to be sort of battery-less and energy harvesting based for all of these IoT sensors coming out. So there are lots of optimizations. Amit's actually alluded to some of these things about, edge technologies that sort of do AI cheaply. But fundamentally, we have to come up with ways, because we are going to sensorify the city, if you will, and we can't go around replacing batteries even if they last a year. So I think that's probably the number one thrust area that I would pick.
Thank you. I have a question here for Amit. What kind of problems relating to IT security does a company like Dell have to deal with?
So the IT security, is, if you start to put in the human context, becomes extremely critical. Today, if you have a car that is autonomous and if not secure, that can have a deadly consequences, not just for the individual, but for larger ecosystem. So the best way to manage security is to embed it at the very basic level, which means that I give you the simplest example. If we have a table and there are 8 seats, and there are 8 seats assigned to what a process or what an application can do, and if the 9th thing shows up, which is someone else from outside trying to influence the application or system to do something else, it's not allowed. You can even take it outside, play with it, understand who the other counterparty is, and so on and so forth. So fundamentally, today, the security approach has always been put a security patch on top of a system that wasn't designed from security first perspective. But as we go into new outcomes, it's no longer about security is a secondary thought. Security is embedded from grounds up. And this is where I think the differentiation will start. Instead of thinking and predicting, you basically don't allow at the lowest level. So infrastructure and the application itself has the application built in. That's the only way possible. Otherwise, it's a cat and a mouse game, right? Ultimately, in this scenario, somebody else win. In that scenario, someone else win. Technology industry has to take responsibility of giving better tools, better products, and better architectures, along with academia, which is what designing a lot of the computer science side of things, to create this grounds-up approach where security is not an afterthought. It is a primary consideration of building an application. And I think we're quite there. And I can give more examples of that, but I hope it gives you the idea of where this is going.
Indeed, thank you. There is a question for Julian, perhaps anchored in the perception of, or the understanding of MasterCard as a financial institution, but I shall ask it the way it's been submitted. What would the most concerning problem of financial technology to a financial institution like MasterCard be? And how will this affect the size and type of demand of information security staff?
So as I've mentioned earlier on, to clarify, I'm a global technology firm in the payments industry, but I think what we see at times also will be very similar to what financial services industry would see. So example of cyber and fraud, cyber security. So I think for us, we play a very great emphasis in terms of developing security that ensures that the transactions that's taken place is safe, secure, and in terms of the data, it is also protected. So I think in terms of that, we place huge emphasis on the importance of data, on the importance of protecting it, because we don't see who buys what item, what transaction goes through at the person's name. It's all just numbers that actually goes through, and so we actually protect that, ensure that is safeguarded. I think the other one that's important is going to come up. It's going to be on digital identity. I think that's going to be a key piece. How then do we, as a company, actually promote the interoperability of digital identity and ensuring that is still also safe and also secure at the same time?
Thank you.
Can I just add one
Please,
thing?
yes.
So the MasterCard, because they are one of our customers, let me give you a technical point of view and what an amazing system MasterCard is. So just to give a transaction back, the response back, whether it's allowed or not allowed, in less than few milliseconds. Each request is processing 1.5 million AI-based rules, okay? Each transaction. So we think just a swipe and it's a check record and yes, no. It's actually 1.5 million rules being processed. Every minute, there's a 45 million request coming in, and each request passes through 1.5 million rules. And the response has to be in few milliseconds, and the fraud rate has to be less than 0.001%, because that's what MasterCard has committed to its constituents. So just think about the technical complexity of building this new system, building this new capability. Just like I was giving you a point of view, is think about this as a system. Digital City is a system that is getting built out. MasterCard as a system has been built out over many decades as well, but to have this level of scale, this level of complexity, this level of predictive nature, and this level of speed is second to none. And so that's why MasterCard is what MasterCard is.
Yeah, thanks very much, Amit. I was hoping that you would add on, but thank you very much for that. And you said few milliseconds. Actually, in the transit, it's 1/300 milliseconds. Was what the LTA insisted, that we must ensure that we keep to that 1/300 milliseconds in order for people to be able to go through safely, seamlessly, and securely.
Great.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. We have about 4 minutes left, and there are still several questions. So I'm going to try and distill the essence of the questions. Apologies if I'm not asking the question the way that you have framed it. And I'll boil it down to 2 questions. One has to do with cities, and 2, I want to give the time to the students who are in our midst, and there are questions from the students. So let me begin with a question on cities, and it's really this, that do you see that with technology and the change that technology wrought, whether or not there is a possibility that major cities will lose their prominence as economic activities are able to function and produce results from anywhere else in the country, and not just in those Tier 1 cities, not even necessarily in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. I'm going to turn to Amit for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Change is always going to happen. I think this is why leadership is important. I think the biggest economic opportunity and biggest disruption side is actually sustainability side. Sustainability should not be seen as a challenge, but as an opportunity. I think that's one scenario. Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities, talent base, being able to participate in a global economy, I think that's a great thing. But I think the cities will not be able to invest on their own, on a technology basis. So unless countries taking leadership, for us to assume Tier 2, Tier 3 cities can prosper as a result of this is not possible. I think, I think earlier we talked about the Singapore size is an advantage to move faster, but also a disadvantage that you have size, larger countries can invest much better. I think that's the point that I think will happen. So yes, it will happen, but I think few cities will continue to be dominant in this coming scenario. One of the largest port, I'll show my hands if I say that the port authorities in Singapore have said the smaller ports are actually not getting as much business because in this pandemic time, it's not clear if they will be able to process the shipments on a timely basis or not. So larger ports are getting busier. So I don't think it is what we will see is a very few, very dominant larger cities and long tail of the smaller cities. And so Singapore has an opportunity to be one of those top 10 global cities that will continue to define how cities prosper, what economic model they follow, how the data economy works. All of that is possible here, and that's very exciting.
I'm going to give the time, as I mentioned earlier, to the students who have asked questions, and I'm going to summarize it. And essentially what it is they're asking, how do they position themselves in the wake of the digital cities of the future? And particularly one of them was quite taken by what you said, Amit, about marrying technology with our domain expertise, and they're looking for some advice. And with a professor on the panel and experienced people in the public and private sector, if I could invite each of you to very briefly say, if you had an advice for your child who is thinking of, his or her future, what is your advice in relation to how they are to live their lives and develop their careers in the digital city of the future? May I begin with you, Amit?
Yeah, sure. I think if I'm advising my child, I would say first, lean in. 2, specialize. 3, find your passion. And 4th, believe in yourself. You know, you can build whatever you do. Some of those things are cliches, but I would say that's what it is. I think this is the time of greatest human conscience to be growing, where we can create an amazing society that is transparent, sustainable, inclusive. There will be challenges. We'll have to manage through this. But this is, to me, this could be another renaissance period ahead of us in the next 30 years. And I certainly believe so. I certainly hope so. And I hope that you will be the ones who will make it happen. I hope my children will be the one that will make it happen. But please do think about what is your passion and specialize, and then pursue something that is worthwhile pursuing.
Thank you. We have the benefit of another private sector partner in the room. I'll ask Julian for her thoughts.
Well, I've got 2 girls, and I always tell them, and one of them is in university year 2, and the other one is in junior college. And I think, I would say, don't follow like what your parents always tell you, like studying the usual degree. Go with what, you are passionate about, and compassionate, both terms, passion as well as compassionate about. And then from there, you get, the foundation to study for that course, to be able to solve for the problems that will really drive the impact. That's the advice I would give I have given my 2 children, and that's, I would like to share today.
Thank you. Kok Yam?
I think my advice would be just to remain curious and don't impose artificial constraints on yourself and your lifelong learning. So one of the things that I respond quite negatively to is when I see new employees and they say things like, well, I'm an engineer, so presentation is not my thing, or I'm a policy officer, so I can't understand this tech stuff, right? So I think these artificial constraints that you place on yourself, it might be a little bit harder to sort of do the cross-domain thing, but that is precisely where the innovation is, and that's precisely where the need to bridge different ideas is. And I think if I have one advice, not just for my daughters, for new employees, it would be that.
Indeed. Sometimes we hear students who say, I only want to do this major because that's my destination. Why are you asking me to do all these other things? And I would encourage you to think more broadly. I'm going to give the final word to the professor in the room. Achan?
Sure. So I think, I want to make it a little more concrete. I think if I had to advise a lot of students who are technology students who are doing computing, I would say you want to merge that where I see the greatest opportunities in understanding human psychology and behavioral science. And I want to explain why. Because I see 2 big opportunities coming up in the next decades. First, we're going to need much better collaboration technology. I mean, we have these screens, we have holograms coming, et cetera, but there is the technology piece, but we need to marry that with a better understanding of how teams co-create, how teams ideate, and this is a capability that requires deep understanding of our sort of psychology and the way in which we collaborate. And I think it's a great big opportunity. The other big opportunity, and this is the advice to students, is look for where there are huge societal disruptions. And I think the other big disruption is going to be this model that you go to college only once. I mean, Singapore's taken the leadership in this, but we might have to go to college thrice, and therefore the way in which we use AI and technology to better match our evolving cognitive capabilities is really poorly understood. So the way to deliver education to a 40-year-old, to a 50-year-old, is a great opportunity. I mean, there's going to be tremendous business opportunities around that. That's my belief.
It's wonderful.
And if I just add one thing to build on your point, the plasticity of brain is a muscle that can be built. So what he's talking about is having kids at a younger age has as many different experiences as possible, and being open to it, and just exposing your kids to different experiences actually prepares them for a better plasticity in the brain later on, because when those changes come in, those will be much better accepted.
Yeah,
so those are the advice for the parents, not just for the students.
Indeed. To the parents in the room and beyond, do pay heed. I think you will agree with me that it's been an absolutely stimulating discussion. At the beginning, we had Amit speak for about half an hour, and then we've had a very stimulating discussion amongst the members. I could not do justice to the discussion in any summary that I put forward, but I would just remind us of the following. One, that change is the only constant. Two, that cities are a major agent in that change. Three, in that change, remember the human being and the human individual. And four, to the extent that we use technology as part of the change and there's no getting away from it, technology is here to stay, use that for the human individual. And for the students amongst us, remember plasticity of the brain, exercising different muscles, and don't constrain yourself. So thank you very much. Please join me in thanking all the speakers for a very interesting and stimulating afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kong. We'll now like to invite Professor Kong to present tokens of appreciation to the panelists.
Oh, thank you very much.
Features our alumni, and I hope you'll enjoy it. And
Thank you very much.
A bit about ourselves.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to invite all to step forward for a group photograph, please. Thank you all. We have come to the end of today's session. The speakers will now take their leave.